We're recording. Thank you.
Great. So hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Kaiser, and I am the Marketing Manager for Psychology here at McGraw-Hill, and I am joined with our Student Success Marketing Manager, Lisa Granger. We are so thrilled you are here today for this talk given by Dr. Bob Feldman on good teaching is good teaching, learning science, and student success in the time of COVID-19. Dr. Feldman is Senior Advisor to the Chancellor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he's also a Professor of Psychological and Brain Sciences. He has served as Deputy Chancellor for the university, as well as Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and Interim Dean of the College of Education. A winner of the College Distinguished Teacher Award, he is a Fellow of the American Psychological Association, the Association for Psychological Science, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He is also the past president of the Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences Foundation and currently chairs the McGraw-Hill Learning Science Advisory Board. So all that being said, there is no person to better talk about this subject to you all today. So Bob, I'm going to stop sharing and pass you the ball and let you take over.
Okay, great. So let me get this up. And all right, do you see that? A slide?
Not yet.
No? Okay. Do you see anything? Do I need to do something here?
I see your lovely face.
You see my face?
Yeah, at the top, you should see a share option at the top of your WebEx screen.
It may also be at the bottom if you put your cursor at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes the share button is there.
There it is.
Perfect. Great.
All right. Now are you?
Yep.
You see, okay. And let me get into full screen here. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, super. Sorry for the technical issues here. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you for joining us on late on a Friday, and especially in the times that we are in right now. It's certainly challenging. It's certainly unusual. It's certainly out of the realm of anyone's experience trying to navigate the world, and let alone our professional lives as well as our personal lives. But what, no. Here we go. Okay. Let me talk about, first of all, what we're going to cover. What is happening in higher education and what is happening to our students. I'd like to talk about some of the short and long-term challenges that we face with our students during the pandemic, and also cover a little bit about learning science and talk about how learning science can help guide us in terms of how we promote student success in the current environment. And I want to start with a quiz. Obviously, this is not a terribly serious one, but I just like you to think a minute about what our students are experiencing. And the quiz is: the average student today is A, struggling to keep a balance between staying safe and maintaining a normal life, scared, depressed, worried about the future, a bit lost and a bit angry, or all of the above. Well, you know, all of the above is probably the right one. And I think the implication is that our students are facing unprecedented challenges, just as we are. And they are trying to navigate a world that is very different from the one that they basically signed up for. And it leads a number of them, and I'll show you the data on this, to experience some serious mental health issues. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of emotion, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress. And so the question is, how do we deal with this? What can we do? And so let me start with the national landscape. And it's very clear that higher education in many ways is in disarray. And this is actually a very recent graph. It's about a week old. And it talks about reopening plans that are in place right now across the United States. And it ranges from fully in person, which are the red dot, to primarily in person, to hybrid, to primarily online, fully online, undetermined. As you can see, the landscape is chaotic in terms of how higher education is approaching the pandemic and what they're doing, and it's also a moving target. So if I showed you the same graphic in a month, I'm sure it would look very different. And I'm absolutely certain in 2 months, it's going to look extremely different, as what everyone is concerned about in terms of a enlargement of the pandemic is just going to likely occur. So our students are struggling in many different ways. First of all, we're now supposed to stay 6 feet apart from each other. On many campuses, students are being tested once or twice, or sometimes 3 times a week, a requirement of going to college now. There have been forced transitions from face-to-face to online learning, and sometimes back from online learning to face-to-face, hugely disconcerting. Facing instructors that in many cases are barely equipped to make the transition to online learning. So it's been a learning experience for the instructors as much as it is for the students. Everyday routines have been upended. Relationships have been damaged in many cases. And the typical support systems that we have in place to help students have been completely strained, and in some cases have disappeared. So what might have been a very robust face-to-face system of support in terms of, for instance, counseling centers are now online and really struggling to maintain and provide effective help to our students. So the environment is one that's very difficult. Another thing that is underlies what students are experiencing has to do with their immature brains. It used to be thought that by the time students reached adolescence, that people reached adolescence, they were fully mature in terms of their brains. But in fact, over the last 20 years or so, we've really found out that there is rather significant growth in maturity of brains that occurs in the early 20s and perhaps up to the mid 20s. And what does this mean? And Larry Steinberg, who is a developmental psychologist, adolescent psychologist at Temple University, wrote what I thought was a really telling article, an op-ed piece in the New York Times. And he talked about the expectation that students are going to be able to maintain social distancing and to follow all the rules that we are now imposing on them was very unlikely. And part of the reason it was unlikely that they would be following these rules is because of their brain and lack of development. And what he pointed to is risky behavior peaks in the late teens and early 20s, wide range, reckless driving, criminal activity, unsafe sex, all binge drinking, all of these things are at their peak in the late teens and early 20s. Our brains are the very most sensitive across our life in terms of potential rewards that are viewed in terms of risky choices. It's also the case when people in their late teens, early 20s are emotionally aroused, they have a lot of difficulty in exercising self-control. And there's also greater activation of the brain's reward regions when students are with other students, when people of the same age are together. So you put all these developmental restrictions on brains, and what you end up with is that it leads to inherently riskier behavior. So in some ways, we're asking students to exercise significant self-control at a time when they are genetically programmed to be the most risky of their lives. It's also clear that mental health is suffering to a significant degree. And these are actually very astounding figures to me. 91% report stress or anxiety. 81% disappointment, sadness, and that is very close to depression. 80% report being lonely or feeling isolated. Almost half of them have had experienced significant financial setbacks, and more than half have had to relocate because of the pandemic. So these are pretty significant numbers in terms of the proportion of our students and the mental health that they're experiencing. And then this to me also is a very telling slide. The statistics showing that this is impairments in mental health to the degree that they've impaired academics 6 or more days in the last 4 weeks. Now, this is the data are from March through May of this year. About a third of our students report being impaired academically because of mental health causes, 6 or more days in the last 4 weeks. And to me, that is really an extraordinary number. And you can see how much higher it is than comparable data from the fall of 2019. I would also be willing to bet that the numbers are actually higher now than they were back in March through May. I don't think things have gotten better. There are also incredible racial and socioeconomic disparities that have been exacerbated by COVID. We know that self-reports show that there are higher levels of stress in people of color. Access to internet is more limited for students living in poverty. There are differences in terms of having adequate hardware available. Even where our students are able to study when they're doing, they've been forced to suddenly go online, the physical spaces are limited for students who come from poor environments. So it's sort of a multiple whammy in terms of what's going on for students of color and for poor students. It's also just availability of broadband access across the United States varies significantly. And you can see, if you just look at the differences across the country, where internet availability is far greater in some areas than in others. So it's a very difficult kind of situation. A lot of students have been forced to change their educational plans due to the pandemic. As you can see in this graphic, almost 2/3 have either changed or canceled their plans relating to education. So the disruptions due to COVID have been significant for the majority of our students. All right, now the question is, will students rebound after COVID? And we really don't know. Certainly the financial struggles that students are facing right now are likely to continue. Even on the college level, there are going to be a significant number of colleges that are expected not to survive. And what do students do who are in these colleges? And the other question is, what percentage of students are going to return? We have students who have dealt with significant amounts of grief and even trauma. There are many students who have experienced the death of loved ones. And, how is that going to impact their experiences after the pandemic is over? And kind of on the broadest level, their view of the world is likely to be significantly altered. We all have an expectation that things are going to move along in a predictable pattern. And when we experience something like what we're experiencing right now, it is a very mind-altering experience. And so, the question, to me, we don't know, obviously, what's going to happen afterwards, but I'm not sure the augurs are all that positive. So, all right, so that's kind of all the bad news, and I want to get that up front and out of the way. So here's another quiz. Given all the challenges they face, educators should feel despair, hopelessness, depression, anger, annoyance, irritation. It's time to consider a new field of work. Once again, I think the answer there is probably at various points we are all experiencing these kinds of reactions and these kinds of emotions, and that's fine. But the good news is that there are things that we can do to face this crisis, and we have the tools to address the problems brought on by COVID. Many, if not most, of our students are rising to the challenge, and that to me is enormously comforting. But most of all, what I want to stress is that learning science can help us find solutions. So I'd like to veer off a little bit and talk to you some about learning science and what learning science is, and make the argument about the kinds of things that learning science can help us with. So first of all, what is learning science? It's a multidisciplinary field which really focuses on how people learn, the ways that people learn, and how they can learn better. And it is a multidisciplinary and very diverse kind of discipline. It covers psychology, data science, cognitive science, anthropology, sociology, and many other fields, with the common thread that it is looking at how people learn and how they can improve their learning. But I think what's most important is it takes a scientific approach to understanding education and looks at what we can draw from science to better understand the educational process. And if you ever need arguments as to why we need learning science, I'm just going to throw out 4 questions that certainly among our students and certainly among lay people are often addressed with answers that are erroneous. So first of all, learning styles. I know we all have learning styles that are preferences for us. So some people feel that they have visual preferences, auditory preferences. They're different. We all know their learning styles, but the question is, do they actually affect learning? A second question is that is sometimes claimed that most people only use 10% of their brains. Is that true? Well, learning science has an answer. The third thing here is, do video programs like Baby Einstein promote brain development? I mean, if I go out and buy a set of videos and show them to my kids, will they be smarter? And finally, a fourth question that's often raised is, are digital natives, those people who have been raised with computers and online. Are they very good at multitasking? I know my students absolutely believe that they are wonderful multitaskers. They do it all the time. They think they're good at it. Are they? Well, all of these questions are examples of issues that have been addressed by learning scientists. So let's go through each one of these. Do you have primarily a visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic learning style? There's very clear evidence that learning styles are unrelated to learning abilities. We absolutely have preferences, but in terms of whether learning styles are actually related to how well we learn, there's virtually no evidence that those learning styles make a difference. Do people only use 10% of their brains? Again, the answer is no. The science is we use all of our brain all the time. Unless we've suffered some grievous kind of brain injury, we use all of our brains all the time. Do video programs like Baby Einstein promote brain development in infants? And the answer is no. There's no evidence that showing young infants videos leads to anything but and there's some evidence that it actually leads to decrements in attentional abilities. That's what the research shows. So those attempts to improve how smart infants are really have been so far for naught. And finally, are digital natives exceptionally good at multitasking? The answer is no. They think they're better at it, but in fact, they really aren't any better at multitasking than anybody else. There are certain limitations on the brain in terms of how many channels we can attend to at the same time. And the science shows that there's really no way to get to be a very good multitasker. We all have some built-in limitations. So all of these questions have been addressed through science, through different disciplines that approach how we can learn. Learning science provides evidence that certain innovations work and others don't, and it also guides the development of future innovations. All right, so in terms of sort of broad principles, and I'm not going to go through each of these, there are 10, you'll be able to look at them later if you're interested in when we provide you with the slide deck, but there's some just a few of the first ones I think are absolutely essential. We need to promote active learning. We need to promote student engagement. We need to have content that is relevant to people, that is personalized to them. We need to take into account who the students are in presenting material, and we need to take how they are performing in the long run and even in the short run in terms of the kinds of experiences that they have. And feedback is also absolutely important. And then also on this list of these key principles are some socially related sort of things. So we need to help students develop self-regulation skills. We need to encourage student-instructor interaction, and we need to encourage peer-to-peer interaction. So what I want to move into now are some very concrete manifestations of these principles and talk about 5 key principles that come from learning science and are applicable to the COVID world. And I'm going to go over each of these in turn, but let me just go introduce them quickly first. Good teaching is good teaching. And what that means is the principles of good teaching are pretty much the same whether we're teaching face-to-face or we're teaching online. Second thing is active learning promotes student engagement is absolutely central to student success. The third is we need to provide opportunities for students to interact with each other and with the instructor. The fourth is we need to teach students how to be successful. Students are not automatically successful. They're not born as a good student or not a good student. They need to be taught how to be good students. And finally, we need to use technology to personalize delivery of material to students. And what I'm going to do is go through each of these principles in turn. So first of all, good teaching is good teaching, whether it's face-to-face or online. In very important respects, how material is delivered is less important than the quality of the instruction. And the principles of good teaching are really quite identical for the two modalities. And if there's one piece of information you walk away from with this afternoon, it's to avoid long lectures. Our students in face-to-face instruction do not successfully learn from long lectures. They don't work recorded online. And in many ways, what I try and do when I'm imparting information, whether it's face-to-face or online, is to follow what I call my 10-minute rule. And that's basically, I don't do anything for more than 10 minutes. I don't talk straight for 10 minutes. I don't, I will vary what happens next. There'll be exercises in class, there'll be polls, there'll be all sorts of different things. Although I sometimes feel I'm encouraging a lack of lengthy attention span, I'm reacting to the actual attention span that students have right now. So I think the 10-minute rule is a very useful one. Okay, so that's the first principle. Good teaching is good teaching, whether it's face-to-face or online. The second one is about active learning and student engagement. It is really central to student success. We need to make material meaningful and relevant to students' goals. We need to personalize the material. Students learn much better when the material is relevant to their lives. We need to provide multiple opportunities to engage with the material, discussing it and having them question it and debate it. All that we can possibly do, things like polls and video clips and other exercises, we need to use. Anything that pulls students in. And then the other piece of this is that we need to reply very quickly to student queries and comments. We need to give them feedback. We need to let them know how they're doing. We need to let them know that we as instructors are engaged with them. It's really central to learning. Next thing is to provide opportunities for students to interact with one another and for students to interact with us. Relationships, I would argue, are even more important to foster in online environments, and they're harder to do. But it is absolutely possible to do it. What we want to do is create a climate in which students feel that they are cared for, and that can come from their relationships with other students, and it can come from relationships with us as instructors. We need to provide assignments that help students work with their classmate. And I'm not talking about kind of long-term group projects, which are extremely difficult for students to engage in right now, given all the strains of even being able to get online when they need to get online. But short-term synchronous kinds of things where students work together in breakout groups and in other kinds of configurations. We can have students instructing one another. We can have debates, discussions. We can have brainstorming kinds of things. Anything we do to make students feel they are working with their peers is an important kind of exercise. And finally, we want to be sure to just have built in to every class the opportunity for students to meet with us outside of class. And that comes formally through office hours that can be face-to-face in a face-to-face class, or online in online kinds of situations. Anything that gets a student talking to you as an instructor directly is extremely valuable. We also want to, and we also are able to have informal kinds of engagement on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media. It matters to students to have instructors accessible to them. All right. We also, I think, is the fourth principle, we need to teach students how to be successful. I think one of the basic philosophical tenets of my life, and I came to this sort of probably a decade or two after I started teaching, but the idea that good students are made and not born. We need to help students become successful students. We need to help students become what I call agile learners. And what I mean is have a flexibility so that when, for instance, you start a class face-to-face and then it goes online, you need to be agile enough as a student to make that transition. And we can help them by teaching the kinds of skills they'll need in both environments. We can talk to them about what it's like to take an online course. We can talk about how they can effectively read material online or read a book. We can talk to them and teach them how to be effective listeners and how to take notes. We can talk to them about good test-taking strategies. All these kinds of things are amenable to instruction, and the more that we are able to take whatever topic it is that we are teaching and to tell students how they can do well on that topic, we are doing a giant service for students. I mean, I remember back to my college days when one of the hardest things I struggled with is there were some courses that I did very well in. There were other courses that were just so foreign from my whole set of experiences that it took me a while to figure out how it was that, say, political scientists thought differently about a topic than psychologists did, and sort of mastering the vocabulary and figuring out the ways that disciplines are different in terms of how they consider material. Well, that kind of stuff can be taught to students. And if you teach to them, they're really going to be more successful. And finally, it's also important to give advice on soft skills, things like how do what is the etiquette on a Zoom call? How do you make yourself heard? How do you leave? How do you interact with your instructor effectively? And how do you not talk over your other students? Those kinds of soft skills in some ways are just as important, and I mean, if you talk to anybody who's in the workplace right now, they're absolutely important in the workplace as well. So I think helping students to become successful students in a very intentional way is a very positive kind of undertaking. And finally, I think it's central to use technology to personalize the delivery of material to our students. First of all, college students they embrace technology. They expect to use technology. They didn't perhaps expect to use it as much as they're using it now, but they, in many ways, this is just part of their life experience. And technology can be personalized to address students' particular needs. And in particular, adaptive technologies there's a lot of data to show they lead to significant improvements first of all, in learning, but also in terms of persistence, retention, graduation rates. Technologies that adapt to students in a real-time way are very important. Let me just give a little bit more on adaptive learning. It's based on learning science. It personalizes learning by taking into account and continually assessing students' knowledge and their skill level and how well they're doing in their confidence level. And they study much more effectively and efficiently. And so one example of this is Connect, McGraw-Hill Connect and SmartBook, in which students are constantly assessed on their knowledge and confidence level. And the system is able to tell what the student really knows and what the student really doesn't know. And that doesn't always jibe with what students believe that they know. So in many cases, students don't know what they don't know. And an adaptive learning environment like Connect allows students to begin to understand what they really do understand and what they need to spend more time on, and material is presented that ultimately leads to long-term memory formation. Adaptive instruction has advantages not just for students who do better with it, but it allows faculty to be more targeted in their instruction and what they do in class. And institutionally, it leads to decisions that are about instruction that are data driven. So adaptive instruction, I think, is hugely important and a hugely valuable enterprise. All right. Well, I want to leave you with 3 takeaways, and I've left some time for questions. And I'm sorry I didn't stop along the way, but I do want to hear your comments. First of all, the COVID pandemic has presented us with extraordinary challenges, not just to our students, but to us as instructors. Second thing is, I believe that learning science can provide us with very practical solutions that can increase student success in significant ways. And finally, I think the adoption of some of the innovations that I've talked about and that are being implemented right now, and anything you do in your teaching right now, I think are going to pave the way for long-term kinds of improvements in education, not just in your classes, but generally in terms of improvements in education in general. All right, so that is what I wanted to cover. I have one more slide here, Q&A. So what I'm going to try and do is, I have not seen the comment. I don't have that slot, the comment thing. So maybe Olivia, if you could, or maybe if you would like to sort of read some of the questions, and I can try and address them. Would we do that?
Yep, I can do that. So earlier in the presentation, Valerie asked, so when you talk about giving students feedback, do you believe it should be immediate as some others claim? Personally, she thinks within a few days, okay, is she off base? So basically wondering, when providing students feedback, how quickly
Right. Well, I try and do it within 24 hours. And look, I have experienced students emailing me and, 10 minutes later saying, did you get my email? And, why aren't you answering me? There is this kind of 24/7 mentality that students have, with the expectation that we do nothing in our lives besides sit on Zoom and answer, wait for questions. So obviously it has to be reasonable, and I think you can't go crazy responding immediately. But 24 hours, and I just saw something pop up here that someone agreed that 24 hours was the recommendation. I think if you do it within 24 hours, and you set the expectation with your students that you can, don't expect it instantly, but within, I will try within reason to respond within 24 hours. And also, I don't, letting them know that you don't work every weekend. And that you have your own life, I think is a valid thing to tell them. So generally, I tried 24 hours is where I'm
Perfect. So then Nancy asked, What are best practices in getting our students to reply to emails from their professors? This is becoming the difference among my students in terms of who is successful and who is struggling in my courses. Is this another deficiency among soft skills?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that helps is setting the expectation at the beginning of the course. I would like you to respond, just as you would like me to respond to your emails. I think students have to know that your emails are not just spam. That there's a purpose, and that you have to be clear with them, letting them know that your expectation is that they do respond. But I realize, I mean, there are students who just disappear, and it's very difficult to deal with. But I think the more that you are able to initially set the expectation or do a course correction midterm, and let students know that they are meant to check their email daily, and that they are it's part of the course requirements for them to respond.
Great. So Elizabeth asked, can you speak to the weekly pacing of assignments right now? Is it better to use more lower stakes assignments, or rather have students work on fewer higher stake assignments? Which is better for?
I'm a big fan of more frequent, lower stakes kinds of things. The reason is the time management skills of our students, and I'm talking about an online environment, but it's probably also true for face-to-face classes. You have to be a really good time manager when there's a high stakes assignment that is due, in 4 weeks. It's so easy for students to get caught up in the everyday misery of their lives, and just put things off. So unless they have exceptional time management skills, which they often don't, I think smaller, less high stakes kinds of assignments yield a better result, because it's easy to remember I have something due every week than it is to remember, I have something big due in 4 weeks. And people put things off. So that is my advice in terms of sort of how to arrange assignments.
Okay, great. We have a couple other questions. Regarding breaking up lecture materials with text, there is the advantage of students presenting synchronously for peer-to-peer interactions. Do you have practical suggestions for peer-to-peer activities when students engage at different?
Okay, I missed about every other word you said there. I'm sorry. Could you? It was practical.
Peer-to-peer activities when students engage at different times.
Oh, so asynchronous kinds of engagement. I think, again, I'd probably call them low stakes kinds of group activities where students are expected to get together offline. There's lots of examples that you can find of things you can do to engage your students working together. I think the advantage of having them do it in a synchronous setting is that they're there, and you can give input, and you can put them in groups and move from one group to another virtually. Whereas when they're offline, it's a lot harder. So I think the synchronous kind of group activities are going to be more successful.
Okay, great. And then here's one more. In your experience, do you find the science of learning is applicable across the lifespan? Are there differences among age groups, say between learners who are 18 to 24 or 30 to 35 or over 55, for example?
That's a great question. I think there are differences across the lifespan, and I think I will admit that due to my experience in teaching in a very traditional university setting with 18 to 24-year-olds is 18 to 22-year-olds really as the major demographic. I'm kind of that centric in that respect. But I think there are differences. There are differences in terms of the kinds of stresses on our students. Many of our older students are working. Many of our older students have kids that they're trying to, their own children who they're trying to deal with in their education challenges online. So yeah, I mean, I think you do have to calibrate what you do to the particular demographic that you have, and the expectations that you have for different demographics are going to be related to the level of those students, the age level. So I think you do have to take it into account.
Okay, great. So Lisa, are you seeing any other questions? I know we're at time, so if we didn't get all of them, we could probably send a follow-up email to people.
Yes, and in fact, I have I don't know if you can see this now, but there's my contact information, and you can feel free to email me, and I'll try and respond within 24 hours.
Well, that's
thank
great.
you. We did have quite a few additional questions, so I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be able to capture those and get those to Bob so we can get a response. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we will send the recording and PowerPoints and follow up later next week. I'll end the recording now, and thank you all for joining us.